The village of Eldenmore said she was dead. They said the forest had swallowed her whole on the night of the blood moon 3 years ago, that the cold had taken her bones, that the wolves had taken what the cold left behind. They said her name with a certain satisfaction, the way people say the name of someone they are relieved to be rid of. Aurora Keene, spoken in past tense, spoken like a door that had been firmly shut and bolted. They were wrong. She was very much alive. On the eastern edge of the Grayville forest, where the pines grew so ancient and so tall they blocked out the sky even in full daylight, there was a small stone cottage that most people could not find. Not because it was hidden, exactly, but because the forest itself seemed to discourage visitors. The paths that led toward it curved away at the last moment, like rivers bending around stone. The wind always blew in the wrong direction for tracking a scent. Animals moved quietly here. The land kept its secrets, and its greatest secret was the woman who lived at its heart. Aurora was 26 years old, though she looked older in the eyes. She was lean and strong in the way that people who have survived on their own terms are lean and strong, not elegant, not sculpted, but built. Her dark hair was tied back with a strip of deer leather. Her hands were calloused and stained with the juice of elderberries and the dried residue of a dozen different roots and barks she used for her medicines. She moved through the forest with the kind of quiet confidence that came not from arrogance but from long familiarity. Every root, every hollow, every game trail, she knew them the way other women knew the layout of their kitchens. This particular morning, she was crouched beside the frozen bank of a narrow stream, refilling her clay water jug when she felt it. A tremor, so faint that a human would have missed it entirely. But Aurora was not entirely human, not anymore, not in the simple sense. She pressed her bare palm flat against the icy earth and felt it again, a rhythmic vibration, the kind that came from many large bodies moving in formation. They are far away, she told herself, rising slowly. They always pass through. They never come this deep. But even as she thought it, the small wolf inside her, the creature she had locked away behind 3 years of silence and solitude and deliberate forgetting, lifted its head and whined. She ignored it, as she had learned to ignore most things that could not be helped. Her name, before it became a ghost story, had been spoken with reverence in the halls of Duskaro Keep. She had been Luna, the sacred, moon-blessed mate of Alpha Calder Keene, for exactly 1 year. In that year she had learned 3 things about being Luna of the Iron Fang Pack. First, that the title came with a great deal of ceremony and very little power. Second, that her husband Calder was not the steady, honorable man she had believed him to be when she accepted the bond at 19. And third, the lesson that had cost her everything, that the most dangerous place in a wolf pack was not at the bottom of the hierarchy. It was beside the alpha. Because when an alpha fell, everyone nearest to him fell with him. And if the fall was not accidental, if it was engineered, if it was a political execution dressed up as a reckoning, then the person beside him became the easiest target, the lightning rod, the sacrifice offered to calm the anger of those who wanted blood. Calder had not fallen. He had been pushed. His beta, a cold-eyed man named Rowan Ashcroft, had spent 2 careful years building the case against him, documenting real cruelties, manufacturing false ones, and when the Alpha Council of the 5 Great Packs had finally convened their tribunal, Rowan had done the thing Aurora had not seen coming until it was far too late. He had offered her, not as a villain, as evidence. He had stood before the 5 Alphas and told them that Luna Aurora had been complicit in Calder's cruelties, that she had known of the illegal border raids, the pack members imprisoned without cause, the young wolves sent to fight in a border dispute she had allegedly encouraged. He had witnesses. He had documents with her seal on them, forged, every single one but flawlessly done. The worst part was not that they believed him. The worst part was that Calder, sitting in the accused seat, had not denied it. He had looked at her across that stone hall with something that was not quite guilt and not quite cruelty, something in between, something cowardly, and he had said nothing. He had let the silence speak for him. The Alpha Council had stripped her of her title, her rank, her right to claim any pact territory, and her right to be acknowledged as a bonded mate. The bond itself could not be magically severed. That was not within any council's power, but the public dissolution was its own kind of violence. She had been branded with the council's mark of exile. A silver ring burned around the base of her right wrist, visible to every wolf she would ever meet for the rest of her life. It told them what she was. What she had been declared. Unworthy. They had given her 3 hours to leave Duskaro territory. She had not cried, not then. She had walked out of those stone gates with her spine straight and her eyes dry, and she had not looked back. The crying had come later, alone in the dark of the Grayville forest, curled against the roots of the largest oak she could find. She had cried until there was nothing left, and then she had wiped her face, stood up, and begun the slow, grinding work of surviving. 3 years later, she was still here. She was hanging a brace of rabbits outside her door when she heard the second tremor. Closer now, much closer. Her wolf surged upward so suddenly that Aurora had to grab the doorframe to keep her footing. The wolf was afraid, not of danger exactly, but of something it recognized. Something enormous. Something that carried authority the way thunderclouds carry rain. No, she told herself. No, whoever they are, they'll pass, they always pass. She went inside, bolted the door, a useless gesture against wolves of any real size, but it made her feel better, and began grinding dried valerian root at her workbench. She focused on the rhythm of the pestle, the smell of the herbs, the sound of the wind in the pine canopy above. She had become very good at making herself still on the outside, while everything inside ran. The tremors stopped. The silence that followed was worse. And then, cutting through the quiet of her forest like a blade through silk, came a voice so deep and so full of natural command that the grinding stone slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. Aurora Keene. Not a question, a declaration. The voice of a man who had never needed to ask for anything in his life because the world simply arranged itself before him. She pressed her back against the stone wall beside the window, her heart hammering in a rhythm that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with that wolf inside her going absolutely frantic, not with panic, but with something she did not have a name for and refused to examine. She looked through the gap in the wooden shutters, and her blood went cold. Standing at the edge of her clearing in full battle formation were soldiers. Not a scouting party, not a hunting group, an army, 40 men in the black and silver armor of the Stormcrown pack, arranged in a perfect crescent formation behind a man on foot. They were massive, all of them, the generals and wardens of the most feared wolf army in the known territories, but they were background noise compared to the man they stood behind. He was tall in the way mountains are tall, not just measurement but presence. Black hair cut close at the sides, longer on top, pushed back from a face that was all hard angles and old scars, and a jaw that looked like it had been set against difficulty so many times it had simply locked there permanently. He wore no helmet. His armor was black steel with silver detailing at the collar and bracers, a long dark cloak hanging from his shoulders, the crest of a crown-end wolf emblem pressed into the chest plate. Aurora knew that crest. Everyone in every pack territory between the eastern mountains and the western sea knew that crest. King Durin Stormcrown, the Alpha King, the man who had united the fractured pack territories under one crown through 10 years of war, diplomacy, and the kind of unwavering will that bordered on something terrifying. He was said to be 32. He was said to be incapable of mercy when he had decided a thing needed to be done. He was said to have shifted into a wolf so large during the Battle of Raven Pass that the opposing army simply ran. He was standing at her door. Aurora looked at the silver brand on her wrist. She looked back at the king. Of course, she thought, with the dry, exhausted humor of someone who has suffered enough that absurdity no longer surprises them. Of course it is him. She straightened her spine, she unbuckled the door, and she stepped outside to face the Alpha King of the known world with dirt on her hands and rabbit blood on her apron, because the forest had kept her alive, and she had decided 3 years ago that she would never again show her fear to a man with a title. King Durin Stormcrown looked at her for a long moment, his amber eyes gold at the center, darkening to deep bronze at the outer ring, moved from her face to her branded wrist and back again. Something flickered in those eyes, not what she expected, not contempt, not the satisfaction of a powerful man finding a small one, something she couldn't read, something that made her wolf go very, very quiet. "Good," he said, his voice was lower up close. "You are alive." "You sound surprised," Aurora said. "Did you come all this way to check?" The man directly to his left, a broad-shouldered general with a silver scar running through one eyebrow, made a sharp sound that might have been a swallowed laugh. Durin's expression did not change, but something in his eyes did. "No," he said, "I came because I need you, and because the truth about what happened to you 3 years ago has finally surfaced, and because the man who put you here has just declared war on my throne." Aurora looked at him. Then she looked at the 40 armed men behind him. Then she looked back at the king. "You had better come inside," she said, "though I will warn you I only have 2 chairs." Durin Stormcrown had to duck to get through her doorway. He did it without complaint, without the self-consciousness that lesser men brought to physical awkwardness, with the simple matter-of-fact efficiency of a man who had spent a lifetime navigating a world not quite built for his size. He stood in her cottage, which was not small by any measure of a normal person, but became suddenly intimate with him in it, and he looked around with those amber eyes that missed nothing. She watched him take in the braided herbs hanging from the rafters, the rows of clay jars labeled in her careful script, the wolf hide on the sleeping pallet, the iron pot on the hearth, the 2 crude chairs he had been warned about, the stack of hand-copied texts in the corner, old herbal law, old pack histories, the kind of books that required a reader who had a great deal of time and very little else. His gaze stopped on a small carving sitting on the windowsill, a wolf rough-hewn from oak about the size of a fist. The work was imperfect, the proportions slightly off, the ears uneven. The work of someone learning in solitude to do a thing they had never been taught. He looked at her. "You made that." It was not a question. She didn't answer it anyway. "Sit," she said, pouring 2 cups of pine needle tea because it was all she had. She did not apologize for it. She set the cups on the small table, sat in one of the chairs, and folded her hands in her lap, and looked at him with the particular steadiness of a person who has survived long enough that the presence of powerful men no longer makes her hands shake. He sat. His knees nearly touched the edge of the table. He wrapped both hands around the cup with a kind of deliberateness, as though he had decided to treat the small vessel with respect. He looked at the cup for a moment before looking at her. "3 years ago," he began, "the Alpha Council tried and exiled you on the testimony of Rowan Ashcroft. He claimed you were complicit in your husband Calder Keen's crimes against his own pack." "I know what happened to me," Aurora said. "Then you deserve to know what has happened since." His voice was level, careful, the voice of a man who chose his words the way a good archer chose arrows. "Calder Keen is dead. He died 14 months ago, a territorial dispute with a rogue pack, the kind of dispute that would not have been necessary if he had not sold his eastern border rights to fund his own lifestyle." A pause. "Before he died, he made a confession, a written one, witnessed and sealed. He confirmed that the documents bearing your seal were forged by Rowan Ashcroft. He confirmed that you knew nothing of the border raids. He confirmed that your exile was a deliberate political removal orchestrated by his beta, who intended from the beginning to take the alpha position himself." The silence in the cottage was absolute. Aurora heard it all, every word. She had imagined this conversation in approximately 1,000 variations over 3 years of long, dark nights. She had imagined how she would feel. She had imagined relief, or fury, or the collapse of every wall she had spent 3 years building. What she felt, sitting across from the Alpha King, was none of those things. What she felt was a deep, aching tiredness, the kind that lives not in the body but in the part of a person that has been holding itself together through sheer determined effort and is simply exhausted from the effort of it. "And Rowan Ashcroft," she said, her voice perfectly steady. "What has he done with the alpha position he worked so hard to steal?" Duran's jaw tightened, a small movement barely visible, but she caught it. "He has spent the past year building alliances with 4 rogue packs along my northern border. 3 months ago, he made a formal challenge for the king's seat, claiming that my claim to the unified throne is illegitimate because I did not follow the old succession laws in unifying the territories. He has the support of 2 of the 5 original Alpha Council members." A pause. "He also has something else." "What?" "The location of the Greyville stone." The name hit her like cold water. The Greyville stone was not a legend, though most people treated it as one. It was a piece of the original moon altar, the sacred site where, according to the oldest pack histories, the first Alpha King had been chosen by the moon herself, granted power over all wolves, confirmed in his right to rule. For centuries the stone had been lost. But the old records were clear on one point. Whoever presented themselves at the Greyville stone and was accepted by it could make an unbreakable claim to the Alpha King's seat. Not a challenge, a sacred confirmation, one that no army and no council could legally override. "He's going to use it to legitimize his claim," Aurora said slowly. "Yes, in 23 days at the next full moon. The window after that is another 100 years. Duran held her gaze. "I need to reach the stone first." "And the stone is in the Greyville forest," she said. She already knew where this was going, and something in her chest twisted at the knowledge. "The stone is in the Greyville forest," he confirmed. "A forest that has actively repelled every scouting party I have sent into it for 6 months. A forest that, according to every tracker and navigator I employ, is impossible to read from the outside." The amber eyes held her steadily. "But you have lived in it for 3 years. You want me to guide you?" "I want you to do more than guide me." He set down the cup. "Aurora, the Ashcroft tribunal that exiled you, I have the authority to formally reverse it. Calder's confession combined with my royal declaration is enough. Your title can be restored, your brand removed, your name cleared before every pack in the territories." She looked at the silver ring on her wrist. 3 years. Every morning she woke up and saw it. Every village she had passed through in the first year before she stopped going to villages, the looks it drew, the way people stepped back, the way even kind people got careful. "In exchange," she said, "guide me to the Greyville stone. Help me get there before Ashcroft. Help me understand whatever you have learned about this forest in 3 years of living in it. And if we fail, if Ashcroft reaches the stone first." Something moved in Duran's expression. Something she suspected very few people ever got to see, a brief, honest acknowledgement of the weight of the thing. "If Ashcroft is confirmed at the Greyville stone," he said quietly, "then the Alpha King's seat transfers to him under sacred law. My army becomes his army. The territories I spent 10 years uniting under peace fall back into the hands of a man who exiled an innocent woman and built his power on lies." He paused. "And the 23 packs that currently live under my protection go back to the kind of existence they had before unification, which is to say, fear." She already knew she was going to say yes. She had known it the moment she stepped through her door and saw the brand on her wrist reflected in his unreadable eyes, not with contempt, but with something that looked almost like anger on her behalf. But she looked at him for a long moment anyway, because she was not the girl who had walked into a bonding ceremony at 19 without asking every question she needed to ask. She was someone else now. Someone who had been burned and left and had grown something harder and quieter and more honest in the burning. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Dawn," he said, and something in his face, something small and controlled and perhaps, she thought, relieved, shifted. She allowed 3 of his generals inside the cottage that night. No more. The rest of the army made camp at the clearing's edge, a process she watched from her window with a complicated feeling, because she had not had company in 3 years and 40 armed men in the trees outside her home felt approximately like being swallowed. But they were disciplined. She would give the king's men that. They moved quietly, built their fires in a tight formation, left her tree line alone. The 3 generals introduced themselves with the formality of men who took their own importance seriously. The one with the scarred eyebrow was Baron Holt, the king's first general, a large, blunt-spoken man of perhaps 40, who had the eyes of someone who had seen a great deal and processed most of it without flinching. Beside him was Myra Dawnfield, the king's warden of the north, a woman of Aurora's own age, shorter and quieter than the men, with watchful gray eyes and the particular stillness of someone who is always thinking more than they are saying. The third was a young man named Corvin Thrace, the king's scout commander, perhaps 23, with the lean build and constant state of attention that serious scouts carried. Aurora fed them what she had, a thick root stew, more filling than delicious, and spread her hand-copied forest maps on the table. "The Greyville is not like other forests," she said, tracing the paths with her finger. "It doesn't simply disorient you, it responds. The deeper you go, the more actively it resists people with hostile intent." She looked up at Varen. "Your scouting parties, were any of them injured going in?" 2 lost their sense of direction entirely and walked in circles for 2 days before we pulled them out, Varen said. "One came back with a broken ankle from a fall that his men said made no sense, flat ground, broad daylight." "The forest tests intent," Aurora said. "It sounds like old superstition. It isn't." She had spent 3 years learning this the hard way. In the first months, when her grief was still raw and her anger still sharp, the forest had been actively unkind to her, paths closing, streams running the wrong way, her traps springing empty. It was only when she stopped fighting and started listening that it settled around her, kept her. She did not entirely understand the mechanism, but she understood the rule. You cannot go in with war in your hearts and expect it to cooperate. "We are going to retrieve a sacred stone," Corvin said carefully. "Is that not?" "Rowan Ashcroft is also going to retrieve a sacred stone," Aurora said. "Intent is not about the goal, it is about what you're willing to do to reach it." She looked at the king, who had been quiet, watching her. "Your men cannot shift inside the deeper forest, not aggressively. The wolves disturb something in the old growth. I don't know the science of it, only the fact of it. If they shift for protection, for necessity, the forest will allow it. If they shift with the intention of forcing their way forward, they will find themselves turned around inside an hour." Durin nodded slowly, understood. "There is also a ravine," she continued, pointing to an area of the map she had marked with a small black circle. "It crosses the only viable path to the stone's location. The ravine is ice-bridged in winter, but it is not simple ice. It behaves strangely, goes soft in cold and hard in warmth. You cannot test it with weight the way you test normal ice." "How do you cross it?" Myra Dawnfield asked. Her voice was precise and genuine, the question of someone who wanted the correct answer, not the impressive one. "One at a time, slowly, and you trust it," Aurora said. "I know that sounds like nothing, but that is the truth of it. You approach it with trust and it holds. You approach it with fear or force, it rejects you." She paused. "I have crossed it 47 times." She watched them absorb this. Watched them weigh it against their training, their experience, their soldiers' instinct for the concrete and the tactical. She watched Durin watching her and not dismissing what she said, which was something she had not expected, and filed away. 3 days on foot," she said, rolling up the map. "If we are careful and we are honest." "And if Ashcroft is already moving?" Varen asked. He would not dare enter this forest with an army, Aurora said with certainty. Not with what his scouts have already seen it do to men with hostile intent. He will come with a small group, likely his 4 most trusted wolves. She paused. Which means the race is not about speed, it's about being right. Durin looked at her for a long moment after she said that, as though the words meant something beyond the tactical. She went to her sleeping pallet and pulled the wolf skin over herself, and told herself firmly and repeatedly that his looking at her was nothing more than an alpha assessing the usefulness of a resource, and that anything her wolf said about the warmth of his amber eyes was 3 years of solitude talking and should be treated accordingly. She did not sleep for a very long time. At first light, the army began its march. The ones who would follow at the forest's edge, 37 generals and soldiers, under Varin Holt's command, maintaining a perimeter so that if Ashcroft's people attempted to approach from the south, they would meet a wall of Stormcrown wolves first. Those who would go in, Durin, Myra, Corvin, and 2 additional wolves Durin chose, a healer named Edric, a quiet man of 50 who said almost nothing and seemed to carry his own stillness, and a tracker named Sable, a young woman with sharp eyes and the quick, precise movements of someone who had trained since childhood to read the world. And Aurora. 6 people, 1 king, and the weight of the entire known pack world pressing on the 23 days they had left. The forest swallowed them at the eastern tree line as Aurora led them in, and she felt it, the shift in the air, the way the light changed beneath the canopy, the ancient quiet that settled like a held breath. She felt the forest notice the group, felt it assess. They are with me, she told it without words, the way you communicate with something that doesn't speak but listens. Please. The trees did not answer in any way she could point to, but the path ahead stayed clear. Behind her she heard Corvin breathe out slowly. It's warmer in here, he said, half to himself. Yes, she said, that's a good sign. She led them deeper, and the Greyville forest wrapped itself around them like a secret, and whatever came next, she thought, stepping over a route she knew as well as her own name, it would begin here. By the second hour inside the forest, the group had settled into a natural rhythm that surprised Aurora. She had expected soldiers. Discipline, yes, but the rigid, forward-facing kind that did not account for the fact that the Greyville was not a battlefield. What she found instead was something more adaptable. Myra Dawnfield moved with the lightness of someone who had spent years in northern wilderness. Sable the tracker was extraordinary, reading the forest floor in real time, adjusting her weight, noting things that even Aurora nearly missed. Corvin was curious, asking quiet questions about the plants they passed that showed a genuine desire to understand, not merely to collect information. Even Durin, the king, the man she kept telling herself to think of only as a strategic partner in a difficult situation, even he moved through the old growth with a kind of attentiveness that was not what she expected. He was quieter than she had anticipated. He did not command in here. He watched. She caught him in the second hour, crouching beside a cluster of moonbell mushrooms, pale silver, only found in old-growth wolf forests, and she stopped. "Do you know what those are?" she asked. "No," he said. He looked up at her. "Tell me." She crouched beside him. She was aware, pointedly and unhelpfully, of how close that put them. She could feel the warmth that came off him even through the cold. Her wolf pressed forward again in that specific, quiet way that she was going to have to address at some point and was not ready to address at all. "Moonbell mushrooms," she said, keeping her voice professionally even. "They only grow where the moon's influence is strong. Old pack territories before the borders were redrawn. This cluster means we are walking over ground that was once a den site, probably centuries old." She paused. "It also means we are on the right path. The stone will be on old sacred ground, Moonbell's market." Durin looked at the mushrooms, then at her. "How long did it take you to learn all of this?" 3 years, she said simply. "Did you have books?" I had the ones I'd memorized before the exile. I had observation. I had time. She stood. Time is a very effective teacher. He stood too, and for a moment they were standing close enough that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes and the way the scar on his jaw, older than the one she had assumed was his most recent. This one was a childhood thing. She could tell, faded silver, ran at the same angle as the set of his expression when he was thinking. I read the tribunal records, he said, before I came here. His voice had dropped so that only she could hear it, all of them, including Calder's final confession. She didn't move. He wrote about the moment in the council hall, Duran said. The moment you looked at him and he said nothing. He wrote about it with a great deal of shame and very little actual apology, which tells you most of what you need to know about Calder Keene. A pause. But he also wrote something else. He wrote that in the year you were Luna, before Rowan began his campaign against you, he wrote that you were the best leader the Iron Fang pack ever had. That the pack's well-being, the healers' resources, the border families, the pups, that those were all better under your management than under any alpha in 3 generations. His voice was quiet and steady and utterly without the performance of sympathy. He wrote it like a man explaining what he had destroyed. Aurora felt the familiar tightness behind her sternum that appeared whenever anything came too close to the thing she had packed away, and sealed and refused to look at. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you should hear it," he said. "Because it was true, and it was taken from you, and the least I can do is make sure you know that someone, even the man who failed to defend you, saw it." She looked at him for a moment that lasted slightly too long for pure strategy. "We should keep moving," she said. "Yes," he agreed. They kept moving, and if the forest seemed warmer in the hours that followed, she attributed it entirely to the natural increase in canopy coverage as they went deeper, and not to anything else at all. They made camp in the hollow of a cluster of ancient oaks whose roots formed a natural shelter, broad and curved, like cupped hands. Aurora showed Edric which plants near the camp were safe to burn for warmth. Certain types of pine resin kept fires clean in the Grayville, and which to absolutely avoid. It was Sable who asked, over the fire that night, what everyone else had been thinking. "The brand," she said, looking at Aurora's wrist with the direct bluntness of a tracker who did not do things sideways. "Does it hurt?" "Sable," Corvin said, with a pained expression. "It's a genuine question," Sable said. Aurora held up her wrist and looked at the silver ring. In the firelight, it glowed faintly. Silver always responded to moonlight and fire both. "Not anymore," she said. "It burned for 6 months." She lowered her wrist. "Now it just exists." "The reversal process," Myra said carefully. "When the king issues the formal reversal, the brand is removed by a moon-blessed ceremony. I've read about it. I've never seen one." A pause. "I've never met anyone who had one removed." "I have," Duran said from the other side of the fire. He was looking into the flames. "My grandmother. She was exiled as a young woman, political removal, the same pattern, different century. She lived 30 years with the brand." His voice was neutral but not cold. "She died 2 years before I had the authority to reverse it. I was 17 when I found that out. I decided that day that exile used as a political weapon would end under my rule." The fire crackled. "And yet it still happened," Aurora said, not unkindly, simply factually. "I was exiled 3 years ago under your rule." "Yes," he said. He looked at her across the fire. "It happened under my rule. By a council I had not yet fully brought under the king's authority, a gap I have since closed." A pause. "It is not an excuse. It is context, but it does not change what happened to you." She nodded once. It was, she thought, the most honest thing a powerful person had said to her in years. No deflection, no defensive layering of explanation. Just, "It happened. I know it happened. Here is what is true." She found it more disarming than any amount of charm would have been. She went asleep that night with her wolf settled for the first time in memory, and she absolutely refused to examine why. The ravine appeared on the morning of the second day, without warning. One moment they were moving through a dense section of old-growth pine that Aurora had navigated 100 times. The next, the trees simply ended at a vertical drop of perhaps 60 feet. Below, the ravine floor was invisible in shadows. Spanning it was the ice bridge, a natural structure that had always baffled her, a sweep of ice that arced from one lip of the ravine to the other with the graceful, unnatural confidence of something that should not exist and did anyway, glistening pale blue in the morning light. Corvin crouched at the edge and looked down. How far is the other side? 40 feet of bridge, Aurora said. One at a time, slow and steady. She stepped to the edge. I go first. You go first alone, Durin said. I have crossed this 47 times, she reminded him. And the first person across establishes whether the bridge is in a cooperative mood. It has been moody in the past. Has it ever dropped anyone? Corvin asked. She paused just long enough that everyone noticed. Once, she said, a deer, but a deer doesn't have any choice about intent, it just panics. She stepped onto the bridge. She had a technique developed over years of crossings. Eyes forward on the far bank, breathing even, not thinking about the drop, not thinking about anything really, just the cold solidity under her boots, the feel of it, the give and take of trust. She felt the bridge flex gently beneath her as she walked, not breaking, not groaning but testing her, the same way a horse tests an unfamiliar rider for fear. I trust you, she told it, the same way she'd learned to talk to the forest, same as always. The bridge held. She reached the other side and turned. Myra, she called, you next. Myra Dawnfield crossed with the same quiet composure she brought to everything, focused and unhurried, and reached Aurora's side with a slow exhale of breath. Corvin went next, then Sable, then Edric. Then Durin. He was the largest of them by a significant margin, and the bridge was not wide. Aurora found herself watching him in a way that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the fact that watching him move, even in something as simple as crossing a 60-foot ice bridge over a ravine, was interesting. He moved without hesitation, but also without arrogance. He treated the bridge with the same matter-of-fact respect she had described. He did not look down. He was halfway across when the ice cracked. Not catastrophically, not a full structural failure, but a sharp snap that echoed through the ravine like a shot, and the section beneath his left foot gave way by 2 inches, his boot dropping suddenly, his body tilting. Aurora was moving before she had decided to move. She grabbed the near side post of a root system that jutted from the ravine wall, the same handhold she always used for the final step, and extended her other hand across the last gap. Grab my arm, she called. He looked at her hand for half a second, then he grabbed it. His grip was iron, careful iron, deliberate iron, the grip of someone who had the strength to crush and was consciously not. And she pulled, and he made the final step off the bridge and onto solid ground, and then they were both on the far bank, her hand still in his, their faces close enough that she could see the slight flare of his nostrils and the way the gold in his irises caught the filtered light. The bridge settled back to silence behind him. He looked at her hand in his. He did not let go immediately. She did not pull away immediately. This was a thing that happened that lasted approximately 3 seconds, and then they both moved back to a respectful distance, and the moment closed like water over a stone. 48 crossings, he said quietly. She looked at him. For you, he said, it was your 48th. She turned away before he could see whatever was on her face. The stone is half a day from here, she said. We should move. They moved. The forest changed in this section, the light softer, the air carrying a faint sweetness she had never been able to identify in 3 years of trying. The trees were older here. Their trunks were so wide that 4 people holding hands could not circle one. The bark was dark silver with age. The moonbell mushrooms were everywhere on this stretch, glowing faintly even in daylight, the way bioluminescent things glowed in deep water. The ground was carpeted in a moss so deep and soft it swallowed the sound of footsteps. Aurora had been to this part of the forest only twice in 3 years, and only briefly. She had felt on both occasions that she was trespassing somewhere not meant for ordinary visits. A held-breath feeling, like being in a cathedral when no service was running. You could be there, but you felt the weight of everything the space was built for. The group felt it too. She could see it in the way they slowed, the way the conversation stopped naturally, the way even Sable's precise tracking movements gentled into something more careful. Even Duran's face changed, not going soft exactly, but the armor dropping by one layer, the deliberate blankness becoming something more present and more human. "How much further?" Myra murmured. 4 hours, Aurora said. "Maybe 3 if the path cooperates." She looked at Duran. He was looking at the trees. "Tell me something," he said, not taking his eyes off the canopy. "In 3 years did you ever go back, even close to the border?" "No," she said. "Did you want to?" She considered lying. She was very good at lying, not to deceive, but the specific kind of lying that is really just choosing not to hand someone a piece of yourself you are not ready to give them. But the forest had a way of making honesty easier, and something about the quality of his question, no performance in it, no angle she could identify, made the usual reflex feel unnecessary. "In the first year," she said, "I wanted to go back every single day, not to reclaim anything, just to be near the kind of life I understood, hearths, pack bonds, the sound of people." She paused. "In the second year, I stopped wanting it so much, and in the third year I realized I didn't want the old life back. I wanted the life I should have had in the first place, the one that was mine before someone decided I was a useful piece to sacrifice." He was quiet for a moment. "And is this it?" he asked. "This life in the forest?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I think perhaps not entirely, but the forest has been kinder to me than most people have, so I am slow to trade it." He nodded, no pushing past what she'd offered, just receiving it. The path ahead opened slightly, and she led them forward, and somewhere ahead in the ancient heart of the Grayville, the stone was waiting, and the world, the whole weight and consequence of the world, was waiting with it. They smelled Ashcroft's wolves before they saw them. It was Sable who caught it first, 2 miles from the stone's location, her head snapping up and her eyes going flat and professional. She moved to Aurora's side without making a sound and said, very quietly, 4 wolves, moving from the south, moving fast. Aurora's stomach dropped. "How close?" Duran asked, his voice dropping immediately into the register of command, not loud, but a frequency that carried through the air and hit the others like a hand signal. "An hour ahead of where they are now," Sable said, "but they're moving faster than us. They have less ground to cover from the south entry." "They know a south entry," Corvin said. "Ashcroft had months," Myra said grimly. "He was preparing for this." Aurora's mind was already working the geography. The southern approach to the stone was shorter in distance but rougher. The forest was denser from that direction, the paths less forgiving. She had mapped it once from the inside and found it nearly impassable. But if Ashcroft had found a route— "There's a shortcut," she said, already turning. "Off the main path. I have never taken it. It goes through the elder grove, the innermost ring, the oldest trees." She looked at them all and said plainly, "I don't know if it will let us pass." "What happens if it doesn't?" Corvin asked. "Best case it turns us around," she said. "Worst case it refuses us and costs us time we cannot recover." "What is the alternative?" Duran said. "We keep our current pace, and Ashcroft's people reach the stone first." He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. "Take the shortcut," he said. She turned, found the marker she'd never gone past, a double-rooted oak with a natural arch between the trunks, which she had always treated as a boundary, and stepped through it. The forest shuddered. Not like an earthquake, more like a breath drawn inward. A pause. Every sound in the canopy stopped simultaneously: birds, wind, the creak of old wood. The silence was absolute and enormous and pressing. Please, Aurora thought again with everything she had. Please. Not for me, for all of them. Because what comes after him, and she meant Ashcroft, will be worse than anything this forest has ever endured. The silence held for another moment. Then the path opened. Not dramatically. Just it was there. Where a dense mass of roots and undergrowth had made forward movement impossible, there was now a clear walking way between the trees, like a corridor that had always been there and they had simply failed to notice. The group passed through the arch in the double-rooted oak, and the Grayville Elder Grove received them. Inside, it was like being underwater. The light was different, faintly blue, faintly silver, with no clear source. The trees were so old their bark had become more like skin than wood. The moonbell mushrooms here were the size of dinner plates, their pale glow steady and warm. The air tasted different. Clean in a way that went beyond mere air, clean in a way that made her feel, briefly and painfully and honestly, like everything that had been taken from her might not have been the end of anything. Moon's grace, Myra breathed behind her. No one else spoke. They moved quickly through the elder grove, quick and quiet and careful, and Aurora led them out the far side into a clearing she had only seen from a distance in 3 years of living in the surrounding forest. The Grayville stone. It was not large, which surprised her again on this second seeing of it. It was roughly the height of a seated person, pale gray, almost white, the surface worn smooth by centuries of weather and perhaps something else, something less categorizable. It sat at the center of the clearing in a ring of moonbell mushrooms, and the air around it had a quality that made the hairs on Aurora's arm stand up, not with fear, but with a fullness, a presence, the sensation of standing near something that was paying attention. They had perhaps 20 minutes on Ashcroft, possibly less. Duran walked forward. He stopped 3 feet from the stone. His hands were at his sides. He was very still. Aurora watched him study it, not with greed, not with the hunger of a man who wanted to win, but with something more measured, something that looked, from where she stood, like respect. "What does he do?" Corvin murmured beside her. "Touch it." "I don't know," she said honestly. "The records say the stone chooses, but they don't say how." Duran turned and looked at her. She looked back. Then he did something she did not expect. He stepped back from the stone, and he held out his hand to her. She stared at it. "What are you doing?" "The records say the Alpha King must be confirmed by the stone," he said. His voice was quiet and only for her. "They also say that a king is confirmed by the moon, and the moon's sacred holders are lunas." He held her gaze. "You are the luna of record. Calder's confession preserved that. Your exile was illegal under the law we are both here to uphold." "You don't need me to," she began. "I know," he said. "I could try alone. I might succeed alone." But and here something passed through his expression that she had not seen there before, something genuine and unguarded. "The stone doesn't only ask if you're powerful enough, Aurora. It asks if you're right. And I think 2 people standing here, both of whom this system failed and both of whom are still trying to do the right thing within it." He paused, and the hand was still held out, patient and open. "I think that might be a truer answer than one king standing alone." She looked at the hand, at the stone, at him. And the wolf inside her, the one she had locked away for 3 years in the cold and the dark and the silence, rose up slowly, fully. And for the first time in 3 years, she did not push it back down. She took his hand. The stone lit up the moment their joined hands touched its surface. Not an explosion of light, but a steady, warm, silver radiance that spread from the contact point outward through the stone's entire surface, reflecting off the moonbell mushrooms around it until the whole clearing glowed. And from somewhere behind them, through the trees, came a howl. furious, arriving too late. Rowan Ashcroft had reached the Greyville forest. He came into the clearing with 3 wolves at his back, all of them shifted. Aurora had never seen Rowan Ashcroft shift before. In all the time she'd lived at Duskaro, which had been his home territory before Calder's and then his own, she had only ever seen him in human form, calculating, controlled, always watching from the edge of rooms. His wolf form was nothing like her expectation. It was large, iron gray, with a long-snouted face and yellow eyes that carried in them the same cold intelligence she remembered from the human version. He was powerful. She would not underestimate him. Behind him, his 3 enforcers stood in wolf form, heads low, hackles raised, positioned in a triangle that every pack wolf would recognize as an attack formation. Durin released her hand and stepped forward, placing himself between Ashcroft and the stone, between Ashcroft and her. The warmth of the stone's light was still in her palm. She held it there and watched. "Too late," Durin said. His voice carried the clearing without effort. "The stone has confirmed." Ashcroft shifted back. His bones cracked back into the human form. The process was smooth, practiced, the shift of a wolf who had done it 10,000 times. He straightened, pulled a heavy cloak around himself, and looked at Durin with an expression that had no panic in it, only recalculation. "I don't see a crown," Ashcroft said. His voice was smooth, reasonable, the voice of a man who had spent years being the most reasonable-sounding person in every room he entered while doing completely unreasonable things. "I don't see any formal witnesses. One hand on a stone in a forest is not a legal confirmation, Durin." "No," Durin said, "but the witnesses I have are enough. 2 generals, a tracker, a scout commander, and a healer will testify to what they saw." "Generals loyal to you," Ashcroft said, "hardly impartial." "There is also me," Aurora said. Ashcroft's eyes moved to her. She watched them do the recognition and the calculation in the same instant, who she was, where she stood, what her presence meant. She watched him process that Durin had come to the forest specifically to bring her, that she had guided them in, that she was standing on the confirmed side of the Greyville stone. And she watched his face do something very small and very telling. It went still. The smooth, reasonable exterior stayed in place, but beneath it, in the eyes, in the faint tightening of the jaw, she saw it. The recognition of a man who had built his entire strategy on a particular absence, and that absence had walked back into the room. "Aurora," he said, with the same warm, reasonable tone he had used in the tribunal hall, "I didn't know you were alive. I want you to know how glad I am." "Do not," she said, quietly, "do not do that in front of me." He stopped. "I have heard every word of this," she said, "and every word you said in the tribunal hall 3 years ago. I know exactly what you are. The forest knows what you are. The fact that you could not enter this forest without being turned around by it should be a strong indication of what the moon makes of you." His reasonable face cracked slightly. For the first time she saw something human and ugly underneath. The frustration of a man who has never been spoken to this way by someone he considers beneath him. "You were exiled," he said. The warm tone was gone. "You have no standing, no title, no." "Her exile was illegal," Durin said, stepping forward. "Formal reversal was issued by royal declaration 3 days ago. Her title is restored. Her standing is as Luna of record until she chooses otherwise." He looked at Ashcroft with the particular quality of attention that, Aurora imagined, had ended several military careers. "And you are on my land, with armed wolves in attack formation, which is one of approximately 15 things I could name right now that constitute grounds for immediate." He did not finish the sentence, because Ashcroft shifted. Not with the reasonable recalculation of a political animal, with the sudden, explosive decision of a cornered one. His wolf form exploded outward, and behind him his 3 enforcers moved simultaneously, and Aurora had enough time to think, "No, don't, not in the Elder Grove before the world went very loud. Durin shifted. She had known, intellectually, that the Alpha King's wolf form was something extraordinary. She had heard the accounts of Raven Pass, but hearing and knowing and then seeing were three completely different experiences, and nothing she had heard prepared her for the reality of it. He was enormous, true dire wolf size, the full ancient lineage of the Alpha bloodline, generations of unbroken power made physical. Black fur, the same pure black as his hair, so dark it absorbed the silver glow of the stone's light rather than reflecting it. His eyes shifted from amber to full gold, burning in the clearing like two fires. His shoulders were at the height of Aurora's chest. When he moved, pivoting to meet Ashcroft's charge, the ground vibrated. Myra was beside Aurora instantly, pulling her back from the center of the clearing. Corvin and Sable flanked them. Edric, the healer, positioned himself at the stone. What followed was not a long fight. Ashcroft was powerful. His three enforcers were experienced, but Durin was the Alpha King in the Elder Grove of the Greyville Forest, beside the Greyville Stone which had just confirmed his right to be exactly what he was, and the forest she felt it was actively with him. The elder trees did not interfere exactly, but the light changed. The ground gave Durin purchase and gave Ashcroft's wolves uncertain footing. The clearing seemed to contract around the enforcers, limiting their angles. Two of the enforcers broke and ran within minutes. Durin pinned the third, a brutal, efficient takedown that resulted in a yelp of submission and a wolf pressing its belly to the ground. Durin held the pin for 3 seconds, then released and stepped back, shifting back to human form in the same smooth motion, as though the enormous wolf and the scarred, dark-haired king were simply two arrangements of the same thing. Ashcroft's wolf was crouched 5 feet away, bleeding from 2 places, his yellow eyes darting between escape routes. "Shift back," Durin said. The command was not loud. It was an alpha command, the deep register, the weight that bypassed ears and went straight to the base of a wolf's brain, and Ashcroft's wolf shifted back against what was clearly its own preference, bones resetting, Ashcroft coming back to his human form, shaking with the effort of resisting it. He looked up at Durin, on his knees in the Elder Grove, and whatever he had built his face into over a lifetime of careful performance was simply gone. "What happens now?" he said. "You will return to Duskaro territory," Durin said. "You will stand before the full Alpha Council and present yourself for tribunal under the evidence that has been gathered against you, the forged documents, the false testimony, the illegal exile of Aluna. You will face that tribunal without a political strategy, because every ally you had is now holding a letter from my office explaining what I know." A pause. "And you will do this voluntarily, without force, because the alternative is that I use the authority the stone just confirmed and handle it here." Ashcroft looked at him. Then, for one moment only, he looked at Aurora. She looked back at him with nothing at all on her face. She had decided that 3 years ago in the dark of the Greyville Forest, she would not give him the satisfaction of her anger any more than she had given him her fear. He got nothing from her. Not a word, not an expression, not the acknowledgement that what he had done to her was large enough to still make her shake. He dropped his gaze first. He stood, he walked out of the clearing. His 2 fleeing enforcers were waiting at the tree line, both in human form, both clearly done. And then the Elder Grove was quiet, and the stone's light was steady and warm, and 6 people stood in the most ancient part of the Greyville Forest and breathed. They did not speak much on the walkout. Edric had tended to a cut on Corvin's arm from a branch in the chaos, and a bruise on Sable's shoulder from being shouldered out of the way. No serious injuries. They moved through the Elder Grove in a subdued, open-eyed quiet, the particular aftermath stillness of people who have been through something large and are still processing the shape of it. Aurora walked slightly ahead, navigating by instinct, her mind running in multiple directions the way it did when she was processing something she didn't have words for yet. She was aware of Durin behind her, not oppressively, He gave her space, as he had given her space since the beginning, but she was aware of him the way you become aware of a fire in a dark room, not by looking directly at it but by the warmth on the edge of your vision. The stone's light was still in her palm. Not literally, there was nothing visible, but the sensation remained, a warmth in the hand that had held his while they touched the stone, and she had enough honesty with herself to acknowledge what that meant even if she was not ready to say it out loud. Her wolf was very, very calm, calmer than it had been in 3 years, calmer than she could remember it being, actually, even before the exile, even in the year of her bonding to Calder, which had been a bond the pack celebrated, and her wolf had always been lukewarm about in ways she had attributed to first bond nerves. This was not lukewarm. This was the absolute opposite of lukewarm. She found a stream she knew and stopped to drink, crouching at the bank. Durin crouched beside her. The others had spread out slightly, Myra examining the moonbell mushrooms nearby with genuine curiosity, Corvin asking Sable something about tracking an old growth, Edric standing quietly with his eyes closed in the filtered light. "You could have let me go first," she said to the water. "At the stone, you didn't need me to go first." "I told you why," he said. "You gave me a reason that sounded right," she said, "but I want the actual reason." A pause, the stream moved between them. "Because I have been looking for you," he said, "for a very long time, and I did not fully understand that until I walked through that door and you were standing there in a rabbit blood apron with absolutely no fear on your face." She looked at the water for a moment longer. "You don't know me," she said. "No," he agreed, "but I know what I felt when the stone confirmed, and I know what I felt on the ice bridge. And I know," he paused, and when she turned to look at him, he was looking at her with that directness he had, that quality of not managing his expression to be palatable, just presenting what was there. "I know that my wolf has been trying to tell me something since approximately the moment I said your name in front of your door, and you walked out and looked at me like I was an inconvenient weather event." She made a sound that was, against all her intentions, a laugh, a real one, short and genuine and surprised out of her. He looked startled by it, in a way that made her think he did not often see people genuinely surprised by his effect on them. Then something shifted in his face, loosened, just slightly, in a way that changed him from the king to the man. She caught a glimpse of who he was when no one was needing him to be the largest thing in the room. She liked what she saw. This was, she thought, going to be deeply inconvenient. "My exile reversal," she said, returning to practical ground because practical ground felt safer. "What does the formal process involve?" "A ceremony before the full Alpha Council," he said, also returning to practical ground, and she suspected for similar reasons. "The removal of the brand, the formal reading of the reversal decree. It takes approximately an hour and requires the attendance of at least 3 council members and the king's seal." "And my title," she said carefully. "You said Luna of Record. What does that mean practically?" "It means you were Luna, that you remain so in the legal sense until you formally renounce it, which requires," he paused. "Which requires what?" "Which requires you to do so before the council," he said, "or to take a different title." The phrasing was so careful and so deliberate and so completely transparent about what it was being careful about that she had to look away to keep her face under any kind of control. "I see," she said. "I'm not asking you anything," he said. "I want to be very clear that I am not standing here in the elder grove of the Greyville Forest asking you anything. I am aware that we have known each other for 3 days and that the 3 days were not ordinary ones, and that this is a pause that was slightly longer than his usual pauses, a great deal to take in." "It is," she agreed. "And I would like you to take your time with all of it," he said. "I have a throne and an army and apparently the blessing of the moon, but I am finding that I am considerably less composed than usual when speaking to you, which I am choosing to interpret as meaningful." She looked at the stream. A leaf was moving on the current, unhurried. "Ask me again," she said quietly. "When Ashcroft has stood before the tribunal, when the reversal is done, when we are not standing in the middle of the forest and I have not been surprised by my own life turning inside out." "Yes," he said. He did not push past it. "I can do that." They reached Duskaro Keep 17 days after entering the Greyville forest. Not Aurora's Duskaro, that had been the Iron Fang Pack's seat, dismantled after Calder's death and the Pack's dissolution. This Duskaro was the regional seat of the Alpha Council, a stone fortress of ancient and enormous proportions set into a cliff face in the mountain range between the eastern and western territories. She had never been here before. She stood outside its gate for a moment and found that looking at it did not produce the terror she had half expected. She had, she supposed, already survived the worst version of an institution failing her. What was one more version of it, this time hopefully working correctly? Durin's generals had arrived 2 days before them, 37 soldiers, plus Varen Holt, who had organized everything with the efficiency of a man who treated logistics the way others treated breathing. The Alpha Council had assembled. 4 of the 5 original members. The 5th, one of Ashcroft's 2 allies, had, upon receiving Durin's letter, apparently had a very sudden change of heart about which political position he held and had taken to his bed with a convenient illness. Ashcroft was already in custody. Aurora was given quarters, her first proper room in 3 years, and she stood in the middle of it and looked at the bed and the window and the hearth, and felt absolutely nothing she had expected to feel, and everything she hadn't, not relief, not grief, not triumph. Just a kind of wide, uncertain openness. The feeling of a person standing in a space that has suddenly become larger than the walls they had learned to live within. The tribunal took 2 days. She sat in it as a witness and as the subject of the reversal, which were 2 different things and required 2 different kinds of steadiness. The testimony portion was the harder one, sitting in a stone hall and saying, in front of 5 alphas and their assembled councils, exactly what had happened to her. Not in the frantic, desperate way of someone asking for mercy, but in the flat, documented way of someone presenting evidence. She found, when the moment came, that she could do it. That the 3 years in the forest had changed the shape of it. Instead of a wound, it had become a fact. A terrible fact, but a fact nonetheless. Facts could be stated. Ashcroft did not dispute the core of it. His allies had abandoned him. His witnesses had recanted under the pressure of the king's investigators, and Calder's written confession had been authenticated by 3 separate record keepers. He stood in the dock with that smooth face cracked and empty underneath and received the tribunal's findings. She did not enjoy watching it. She had expected to. She had rehearsed some satisfaction for this moment, but sitting there, watching a broken man receive a verdict, she found she felt mostly tired and mostly sorry, not for him, but for the version of herself who had needed this to feel like a victory. Real justice, she realized, didn't feel like winning. It felt like something long overdue simply being corrected, like a bone that had healed wrong being reset. Necessary and painful, and then, slowly, better. The reversal ceremony took place in the main hall under the full moon's light, the hall's ceiling open to the sky above. A traditional design, used for exactly this kind of ceremony, though the council members had told her they had not used this particular portion of the hall in 40 years. She stood in the center. The brand on her wrist had been silver for 3 years. Under the direct moonlight it glowed brighter, and she understood for the first time that it had been resonating with the moon's light all this time, not as a punishment, but almost as a compass, a marker. The moon had not forgotten what had been done wrongly in its name. 3 council members spoke the old words. She had tried to learn them ahead of time but found she couldn't quite make them stick, which she thought was probably right. These were not words she needed to know. They were words being said for her. Durin pressed his seal to the reversal decree last. And the brand went cold. Not painfully, rapidly, the way a coal goes cold when water hits it, a sharp change in sensation from warmth to absence. She looked down at her wrist. The silver ring was gone, not faded, not reduced. Gone. The skin where it had been was smooth, slightly paler than the surrounding skin, a ghost of what had been there, but nothing visible, nothing a stranger would see. She looked at it for a long time. She was aware, dimly, that Myra was crying somewhere behind her. She was aware of the hall full of people who were watching. She was aware of Duran, a few feet away, watching her with that steady amber gaze. She looked up at the open ceiling, at the full moon. She had not asked for any of this. She had not asked for the exile that sent her to the forest, or the 3 years in the cold, or the strange and disorienting arrival of a king at her door, or the ice bridge and the stone and the elder grove, and all the days between then and this moment. But she was standing here, still standing, still herself, which was something she had sometimes doubted in the dark middle of winter nights when the forest was very quiet and her own company was the only kind available. Still herself, and something more than she had been 3 years ago, in ways she was only beginning to understand. She pressed her unmarked wrist to her chest and breathed. He came to find her on the 3rd night after the tribunal. She had expected him before that, or feared he would come before she was ready, which was its own kind of expecting. But he gave her the days she needed without being asked to, which was something she filed under evidence in the growing case her wolf was building in her chest. She was in the small walled garden behind the keep, sitting on a stone bench under the full aftermath of the moon, her bare wrist resting on her knee, feeling the cold night air on skin that had been covered for 3 years. It was a strange freedom, the absence of the brand, small and enormous at once. She heard him before she saw him, a particular quality of footstep she had learned over a week of proximity, the way you learn the specific sound of a thing that has become relevant to your life. He sat down on the opposite end of the bench, leaving appropriate distance between them, which she noted and appreciated, and also found she slightly resented. "You could come to the other end," she said. A brief silence, then he moved. He sat close enough that his shoulder was near hers without quite touching, the careful discipline of someone who was not going to assume, who was going to wait until she told him clearly that assumption was permitted. She looked at the moon. "In the forest," she said, "on the 2nd night you told me about your grandmother, the exile that you couldn't reverse in time." She paused. "I think about that, about what that cost you." "It is why I came to you personally," he said. "Not a courier, not a general. I didn't want you to receive a letter explaining that your exile had been reversed and please report to the tribunal. That felt," he searched for the word, "like doing the wrong thing correctly." "It would have been," she agreed. "I needed to see you myself," he said, "and I will not pretend that was entirely about the Grayville stone." He said it plainly, not with the armor of performance, just the plain statement of a man who was honest even when honest was complicated. She turned and looked at him directly. He looked back. Those amber eyes, gold at the center in the moonlight, much closer to pure gold, the full wolf eye, the real color beneath the human version, visible when his wolf was present and paying attention. "When you asked me on the mountain," she said slowly, "to take your hand at the stone," she paused, "did you know what it would do?" "I knew what I hoped it would do," he said. "I did not know if the stone would respond to the 2 of us together. I hoped it would." A pause. "Because I was not certain, standing there, that I should be the one confirmed alone, not because I doubted my right to the seat, but because," and here the voice changed, lost the last of the King Register and found something underneath it, something unguarded. "Because I have been ruling alone for 10 years and I am very tired of it, and I thought that if I had one chance to not do this particular thing alone, in the most important forest in the known world, I wanted to take it." She was quiet for a moment. "And if I had said no," she asked, "if I had not taken your hand?" "Then I would have gone to the stone alone," he said, "and I would have brought you back to Duskaro and seen the reversal done and thanked you for your guidance and, a brief pause, returned to the throne and been a king, and told myself that not everything we hope for is ours to ask for. He looked at her. And I would have thought about you every day for the rest of my life, which would have been deeply inconvenient. She made that sound again, the surprised, genuine laugh, shorter this time, barely a breath but real. He watched her do it with an expression that she recognized now, having seen it several times in the forest, the expression of a man who spent most of his time in a world where no one surprised him, and who was finding surprise to be something he wanted considerably more of. She looked down at her wrist, smooth skin, moonlight on it, free. "When I was in the forest," she said, "I built a life. I built it out of spite first, and then out of necessity, and then eventually out of something that felt like actual choice. The herbs and the healing and the maps and the carving and the 48 crossings of an ice bridge that makes no physical sense." She turned her wrist over, looking at the absence of the brand. "I am proud of that life. I don't want to leave it entirely behind." "I would not ask you to," he said. "The Greyville Forest is in the king's territory. Its healers and its knowledge are an asset I have no interest in removing from it. And he paused again, the way he paused when he was choosing the precise right thing instead of the easy thing. "I want you to choose, whatever you choose, not because it is useful to me, because it is yours." She looked at him for a long time. 3 years, 48 crossings, the sound of a name spoken like a declaration from the edge of her clearing, the warmth of the stone in her palm. Her wolf was very, very certain. It had been certain from the first moment in that cottage, from the moment she'd looked through the shutters at the man standing in her clearing, and her wolf had gone not afraid but awake, for the first time in 3 years, with the particular aliveness of something recognizing what it had always been looking for. She was not her wolf. She was also not the girl she had been at 19, who had accepted a bond because it was arranged, and because she had been told it was right. She was someone who had spent 3 years becoming very clear on the difference between what other people decided she should be and what she actually was. What she actually was, sitting on a stone bench under a full moon with a king at one end of her arm's reach and the Greyville Forest 2 days behind her, and every Ashbourne wrong finally put right, was someone who had earned the right to choose entirely and freely for the first time in her life. She reached across the space between them. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers immediately, not gripping, not claiming, just closing, the same way they had on the ice bridge, the same careful and deliberate warmth that she had been cataloging for a week without admitting to herself that she was cataloging it. "Ask me," she said. He looked at her. Just looked, the armor down, the king set aside, the man present, the amber eyes steady and warm, and everything she had been refusing to let herself see clearly for 10 days. "Will you come back?" he said. "Not to the court, not to the throne, to me. We can decide the rest of what that means together." A pause. "Slowly, if you need slowly, I am not going anywhere." The moon overhead was very bright. The Greyville Forest was 2 days behind her, and it would always be there. She had learned enough to know that the forest did not forget the people it had kept. She could go back. She could walk those paths and cross that bridge and sit in the elder grove and touch the cool surface of the Greyville stone any time she chose, because it was, as Gideon had reminded her, the king's land, and the king had just told her she was welcome in it. But she had also learned, in 3 years of building a life from scratch, that being welcome somewhere and choosing to stay were 2 different things, and the choosing was the only one that mattered. She chose. "Yes," she said. He did not shout it, or celebrate it, or do any of the things that lesser men did with a victory. He simply held her hand and looked at her and breathed, and the moon was overhead, and the pack world was in front of them, complicated and enormous, and for the first time in a very long time, genuinely possible. The tribunal's findings took 3 weeks to reach every pack in the known territories. The documents were thorough and unambiguous. The exile of Aurora Keene had been executed illegally on manufactured evidence. The reversal was full and permanent. The name Aurora was to be struck from every record of shame and restored to every record of honor. And Rowan Ashcroft, stripped of his alpha title, his pack lands, and his council standing, would spend the next decade in the rehabilitative custody of the Eastern Pack Tribunal. The Alpha King's formal declaration of intent. What it was, everyone understood. What it was called in the official document was a preliminary acknowledgement of dynastic consideration, which was the most diplomatic possible way of saying what Corvin called it in the barracks loudly, to considerable approval. The king found his person. Aurora read the declaration in the walled garden. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and went inside and sat with it for a long time. She had one letter to write before she was done. It was to the Grayville forest, which was absurd. You could not write a letter to a forest. But she wrote it anyway, because she had spent 3 years talking to it and it had listened, and the least she could do was tell it what had happened since she left. You kept me, she wrote in her small, careful script. 3 years in the cold and the dark, and you kept me. Whatever made you do that, I am grateful. I am alive. And it turns out that was enough of a start for everything that came after. She paused, then added, I'll be back. Some things you don't walk away from just because you've found somewhere else to be. Some things you carry with you. She folded the letter. She set it on the windowsill beside the small oak wolf she had brought from the cottage, uneven ears, imperfect proportions, the work of someone who had been learning, alone, to make things with her own hands. Duran found her there later and sat beside her, and she showed him the letter and he read it, and he folded it back and handed it to her and said nothing, which was the right response. The oak wolf, he said, nodding at the carving. I should warn you, I asked one of the palace carvers if she could teach me. She said yes. Aurora looked at him. You want to learn to carve? I want to learn to do something that has nothing to do with armies, he said. And I suspect I will be terrible at it for quite some time. I have been told that is part of the point. She looked at the little wolf on the sill with its uneven ears. Yes, she said, that is very much part of the point. 3 months later, at the spring full moon, in the great hall of Stormcrown Keep with every alpha and council member, and pack representative and general and healer and scout who could be fit into the space, and several who stood in the courtyard below the open windows, Aurora stood before the moon again. No brand on her wrist, her hair down, a dress the color of deep forest shadow, simply cut, chosen by herself and not by a protocol keeper. Beside her, Duran, out of armor for the first time she had ever seen, dark clothing, no crown, the scar on his jaw the same silver-faded childhood thing she had studied on the ice bridge, and in his hands a length of braided silver cord, the traditional bonding token. She had chosen this, every element of it. She had taken the time she needed, months of it, weeks of long conversations and quiet evenings and mornings where she woke up in the forest cottage and rode to the keep by midday and sometimes stayed, and sometimes went back to the trees, working out the shape of a life that was genuinely hers and not a version of someone else's expectation. The moon efficient spoke the words. The silver cord was wrapped once around their joined hands, both wrists, her unmarked one and his battle-scarred one. Do you come to this bond freely? The efficient asked. I do, Aurora said, and it was so straightforwardly true that it cost nothing to say. It was the easiest sentence she had ever spoken. I do, Duran said, and she heard in it everything, the 10 years of ruling alone, the grandmother he hadn't been able to reach in time, the amber eyes in the dark of the forest, the hand held out at the edge of the Grayville stone. The cord was tied. The moon was full and bright and present. And the wolf inside her, the one she had spent 3 years locking away in the cold and the dark and the silence, rose up fully for the first time. Not broken, not dormant, healed, in the way that things heal when they are given enough time and enough honesty and enough room. She shifted for the first time in 3 years. It was not painful, the way she had feared it would be. The way she had feared her wolf form might be lost entirely, or changed, or fractured beyond function. It was the opposite of painful. It was the feeling of a door swinging open on a room that had been sealed shut so long you'd forgotten what the light inside looked like. Her wolf was pale silver, almost white, the moon's color, the color that had marked the keen line for 3 generations. Smaller than Durin's enormous black wolf, but not small, she was the size of a large mountain wolf, lean and fast and present. She shook out her fur. She looked at the hall, at Myra Dawnfield with tears down her face, at Corvin with his mouth open, at Sable grinning, at Edric standing in the quiet way he stood everywhere, and at Durin, who had shifted beside her without ceremony, his black wolf impossibly large next to her silver, and whose wolf looked at her with those full gold eyes and did the thing wolves do when something vast and long-awaited finally arrives. It simply went still. Still and settled and present. She pressed her shoulder against his side, the specific, deliberate contact of 2 wolves who know each other, who have chosen each other, who are done with any version of alone. The hall erupted. Outside, the courtyard wolves tilted their heads back and howled, and the sound rolled out over the Stormcrown Keep and across the territories, carried on the spring wind toward every border and every pack and every settlement that had, for 3 years, said her name in past tense. She was very much alive. She was very much home. The moon heard everything.